Okay, guys, so I'm starting the recording before I start presenting so that I can respond to a question that was put to me in a very long voice note. So I'm hoping the person who submitted the question can remind me of all the things you were asking about. So if I remember carefully, they were asking about how long your presentation ought to be in terms of the assignment that you have to do. And the answer to that really is as long as is necessary, but what you want to try to do, knowing that each class there are two presentations, to try and keep it down to about an hour and a half. Some chapters are longer and some chapters are a little shorter or I should say longer or shorter, but some chapters are a little dense and some chapters are not as dense in terms of the quantum of information that you have to present and explain. So some chapters might be a little easier. Yes, you can use um, the examples from the textbooks, but I would say augment those examples with your own examples that you can find that connect more readily to us as individuals in everyday life, especially your peers in the class. So you can, kind of use the examples from the textbooks or the illustrations from the textbooks as a jumping point and um, add your own types of examples or other examples that you might find that you think might be more understandable to the students in the class. So again, you remember you're teaching it. You're not just presenting the topic, you're teaching the topic so that the best way to try to connect it is to make it real to people from the classroom. And today we're going to be going through the first presentation. You're going to see what's going on. Now, in terms of the presentation tools, if you are available for the class, you should be doing your presentations live. The only way I will allow pre-recorded presentations would be if somebody is not available due to work or personal issues that they're facing in terms of their timing to get to class. That's the only time you'd have a pre-recorded presentations. The presentations ought to be live because you also have to allow for the opportunity for your students in the class to ask questions for clarification. So that's another response. Anything else you'd asked? See if I can remember who was that person who had asked that question. Um, they didn't say who they were. Natoya. That's Miss Bain, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. Anything else I missed out on your questions?
I asked also if we strictly use any book for the
Yes.
information.
Remember, right. So you are primarily utilizing the textbook for your presentation, and that's simply because that is the source material that is required to utilize. But you can augment that with information from other sources, but you cite all your sources, and at the end of your presentation, you put in your citation as required, APA format all the way. All right, including the textbook itself. So you remember when you're teaching a class, there's generally going to be a shared resource in the classroom, as with any class that you might have attended in the past. You have a textbook, and you. The reason why we stay close to the textbook is because if if that is the textbook that is identified as the learning resource, then you ought to be using that learning resource in the classroom settings because it's a common document that is utilized across the class. Which is one of the reasons why a lot of parents, for example, get annoyed with teachers when they go out there and have spent a lot of money buying textbooks, and at the end of the day, the teacher doesn't use the textbook as a resource in the classroom. So it feels almost as if they've wasted their money buying those textbooks because they weren't used during the process of teaching the class. I'm a firm believer, and if I say this is the textbook that we're going to be using, then that's the textbook we're going to be using. So all of the information that I'm presenting to you ought to be available in the textbook. This class, you'd realize, is a little different. because we can augment the information with information coming from other textbooks or other sources. Doesn't only have to be textbooks. It could be video presentations, YouTube videos, that type of stuff that add explanation that will help you in understanding the work that you have to present. All right. But primarily we have to have a commonality in terms of a base source of the data that we're using. So far, so good. Everybody's okay with that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Any other part of that voice notes, or while we're talking about it, if other people have questions they want to ask for clarification in terms of how the presentations are going? Remember, the presentations are, yes, go ahead, ask.
No, I had also asked if we have to put everything in our own words, or we could
No, you can paraphrase parts of the text or even use direct quotations from the text itself. It's
okay.
Again, because it's a common resource that we're utilizing. So remember this first area here, content coverage. It's important that you cover all the content coming out of the textbook. All right. And for those of you who missed last week, let me bring up the textbooks and see what they look like for you. All right, so this is the main one that we're going to be using, Exploring Leadership. This is what it looks like. All right. And this week, I am starting the presentations for the first part of the textbook, part 1, which is Leadership and for the Changing World. That's this entire 3 chapters here. I'm going to be dealing with this over the next 3 weeks, giving you all some time to get prepared to handle the other chapters. So the first 2 chapters that we presented, according to the schedule, that would be on that would be the 3rd of October. You all will be dealing with understanding yourself and understanding others. Those are the 2 chapters that you're dealing with. Then we move on to integrity and moral purpose and interacting with teams and groups. So you see, we're flowing through all of these chapters, understanding complex organizations, being in communities. And then from here, after doing in communities, we kind of start to bring up more of the DAFT, because the DAFT chapters start to come up kind of scattered throughout the thing, but we're not going to be doing all of the things from here. We're going to be doing chapter 6 from here. All right, that's the personal side of leadership. We're going to look at leadership, power, and influence, that chapter as well. Strategic vision and direction, this one here, and then chapter 15, leading change. So we're doing a couple of chapters out of the DAFT textbook and the vast majority of this textbook here. There are a couple more parts here, making a difference, understanding change and stuff like that. But I think the idea was that we found that these 2 chapters here, understanding change and strategies for change, were dealt better by the DAFT textbook and that kind of stuff. So that's why we're using a combination of 2 textbooks. That makes sense, guys? Everything's kind of falling in place. Everybody kind of following what's going on. Yes, no, maybe, not sure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, following. Can you make available the chapters that we will be using from each textbook? Because I think I read some chapters that we may not be utilizing for the program.
They're here. They're on the schedule. They're listed here. Chapters 1 to 3 that I'm dealing with. Chapter 4, 5, 6, 7. Chapter 6 from the DAFT is listed here. Chapter 9, then 8, then 13 from the DAFT, 12 and 15 from the DAFT. That's all listed here in the presentation document sequence.
All
so
right,
all
so my apologies. I now understand. I was using the DAFT strictly.
Oh, no. It's a combination of the 2 books that we're utilizing. So that's why each presentation carries the chapter title. All right. And remember, when we're doing that, we're looking at this is the marking scheme that I'm looking at: use of citation, style of delivery, 25%, use of content coverage, and so on. I will be utilizing a mark sheet when I'm marking your, well, when you present, I'll be marking, and I'll be looking for all the content coverage, the nature of your examples. I'll be making comments, and after you finish your presentations on the day of your presentations, I will speak to each group individually and give you feedback and give you a score out of 90 or 100%. All right, in terms of how you went about presenting and what the thing was. Now, in terms of the length of time, as I said, we want to try and maintain an hour and a half for the PowerPoint present for your teaching sessions. You'd find that my sessions might be a bit longer because of the amount of details that I have to go through, and because the chapters are more fundamental. Now, for those of you who might have already gone to the e-classroom and looked at the chapter presentations here, you might find they're very long, in the sense that there are a couple hundred of like one of them is like 100 or a little more than 100 slides. The reason for that is because they're standalone documents. They're not meant to be utilized as a presentation tool. Though I'll be using them in my presentations, I may not spend a lot of time on all the slides. I'll skip through based upon what we're looking at. These presentation slides are created for them just to be on their own, for you to kind of go through those chapters without having to read the textbook itself. And because of the size of the font that I'm using, that's why we ended up with such a large number of textbooks, or a large number of slides, I should say, going through. That makes sense? Ms. Bain?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So you understand the difference. So it's the same thing if you did my econ classes. For those of you who do it, when you go and look at my presentations, my slide presentations, they're not designed for like doing a presentation. They're designed to be a standalone source of data to explain fairly involved, complex concepts for people who are dealing with the topic that we're dealing with. So out of necessity, because it's meant for you to interact with by yourself, it would have a lot more details than if you were doing a presentation. A presentation, you don't have to have all that detail because you are there as part of the presentation, and you are adding more stuff that's not on the slide, but is implied by what you have on the slides. That makes sense, guys? Yeah. All right.
Yes.
So
yes, sir. Understood.
All right, cool. All right, so we already have the recording started. So are there any other questions or queries that people have? Samantha, this making better sense to you now in terms of what your expectations are?
Yes, it is.
All right, and Daniram, same thing, seeing as you missed last class?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, so let's get started with the presentation for today, and I'm gonna set it up. Are you all seeing this clearly? I'm going to set it up because just in case people want to make questions or ask questions or make comments, I'd like to have the list of students on the side here so I can see who's responding to me. Can you all see the slide clearly there?
Yes, sir.
All right. Remember,
Yes.
if you are using your mobile device, you can actually zoom in too. You can pinch in and that kind of stuff. All right. Okay, so let's get started. This presentation deals with chapter 1 and parts of the preface information that comes up. So the first thing we're actually going to be dealing with is looking at the course description, which is in the course outline. And what we want to point to and take from this is that, remember, this is an introductory course into leadership and ethics. It is not meant to be a immersive course in leadership, though at the end of the day, when we finish the course, you'd realize that leadership is an exercise that requires a lot of immersion in and thinking about or reflection in everyday life, basically across the board. The focal point of the leadership model that we're going to be facing or looking at is one that is going to be, as it says, a shared personal responsibility of ethical leadership through self-analysis. So this course is designed for you to recognize your own leadership potential in the context of doing your own self-analysis, which is why we have the 2 assignments that kind of go with it. If we go to the other assignments here, the self-analysis assignment and the leadership and action plan, those are related to those particular course objectives. All right. So it is going to look at your development of your own personal leadership assessment and your own values exploration, which means in order to evaluate your own ethical values, you're going to be exploring what is important to you. And of course, we're looking at the application of ethical decision-making models for you to be aware that ethics is not just something that exists in books only, but it's something that is important across the board. All right, so we have to look at a lot of the theories of leadership that exist. We are going to defend decision-making that was made in the past and so on, or evaluate our decisions that we've made in the past, utilizing ethical decision-making tool to evaluate it, and you'll get an example of that. Create a plan that applies the concept of good governance. That is the leadership action plan that comes up at the end. We are going to put you in teams in various formats to be able to display and work at developing better group dynamics and group understanding. And there's a chapter that deals with that as well, or a presentation that actually deals with that. We're going to be looking at current issues facing leadership and issues that we feel should be dealt with in terms of the nature of leadership that we see around us, especially in the context of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. And this one here is kind of lofty. We want you to be able to display changes in behavior that indicates that you have accepted and developed your own personal philosophy of positive leadership and ethics. Now, how many of you all understand that concept of behavior modification? I don't think I remember having anybody in here from SOS, from the behavioral sciences degree programs. Most of us are here from management. Is there anybody who is here from the SOS degrees, SOS or psych degrees? No? Any of you all did the psych 100 yet, 103 or 102, I think it is? Just a show of hands would be useful. Nobody here did psych 103. All right. All right. Okay, a few of you. 2. All right. Okay, so what is behavior modification? How do we go about achieving behavior modification? Yes, Mr. Francis. I see a hand up. Yes.
No, sir. I was trying to take down the hand. I saw it still up.
It's still up now. But answer the question. Try a response. What do you understand by the concept or the idea of behavior modification?
Well, behavior modification, I think, would come from a person's internal belief system, their intentions, what they want to achieve. So you would adjust your behavior based on what you want to achieve. So
right. Okay, that makes sense. But is that the only way behavior modification takes place?
Well, I think it takes place through learning. What you learn tells
True.
what you want
but
to do.
How did your behavior get changed along the way in your lifetime? You never get licks, Francis.
Reward and punishment. That's Skinner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the first methods that is utilized for behavior modification is reward and punishment. In some instances, severe punishment. All right. especially in the Caribbean context, we recognize that a lot of the older individuals in society went through life where punishment was a serious part of the behavior modification models that was utilized. And to a great extent, we still see that happening in our societies around us, not so? Would you agree with that? How many of you all were punished as children growing up in one manner or the other? Some people with corporal punishment, others with, you know, the removal of what do you call it? Removal of your, I don't know. I never got that once. Sorry?
So a good swizzle stick or a rubber slipper.
Yeah, that's the one I understand. The Qatar's approach, you know. But removal of privileges. Yes, privileges. Yeah, like you can't watch TV.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Melanie.
No, I was saying gadgets like your phone or computer.
Right. Those are your privileges. You know, you take your phone from you, that kind of stuff. That's when you have a more civilized approaches to behavior modification. But I know, I mean, in my lifetime, I get some cutters with all kind of things. Piece of wood or hose. I can get a plate swing behind me. I mean, and at the time, obviously, people might look back on this and say, you know, that was really barbaric type of behavior. But the idea was at that point in time, that was what parenting was all about. Now, we can't do that in this classroom. I can't go around with a big stick and beat you all and say, you know, you need to change your behavior. And what Mr. Francis talked about was actually true. The best and the most long-lasting stimulus for behavior modification is internal intrinsic stimulus, where you want to change your behavior because you see that as a benefit to you or benefit to the circumstances that you find yourself in. And that is where we're hoping that this course will encourage you and stimulate you to be able to make those behavior modifications. So we're not going to be able to see that just yet, but we will be looking at it from that perspective, which is why one of the assignments asks you the question to list your expectations now. And I'm hoping that people did that assignment and they started off by last week going in and listing the expectations you have of the course and the lecturer and yourself at the beginning of the course. And at the end of the course, how have those expectations been met and how have they changed? What have you learned about yourself during the capacity of the class? Those kind of questions are looking to document whether or not that behavior modification has been able to take place. All right. Okay, so moving along. The textbooks we talked about that we're using for this, we already referred to those already. So let's get started. This is in Unit 1. And Unit 1 is focusing its attention on trying to evaluate leadership in the current context. And we want to be able to explore leadership in the modern society, as well as to look at the Caribbean environment in which leadership exists. And that's where we have to add value to this, because the textbooks are written from an American or US perspective, and we have to embed into that. Which is why I'm asking you all to bring your own examples from our environments into the discussions and the concepts that are developed in this textbook or these textbooks, because we need to make it applicable to our experiences. All right. And we need to look at our local leaders and regional leaders to see how much they measure up to what this model that we're going to be looking at helps us with. So let's start with a definition. This text and this model defines leadership as a relational and ethical process of people together attempting to accomplish positive change. So the biggest takeaway from this is that leadership is about a relationship, the relationship that you have with the individuals in your in the context that we're working with. Now, this is an important focal point of the leadership model, because a lot of other models focused on the leader and what the leader does. But this model focuses not only on the leader, but the leader and the relationship that the leader has with the people who they're leading. And it looks at the nature of that relationship, or whether or not that relationship is ethical in nature. So this is a bit of a turnaround. It's sort of a 360 approach to what's going on, or 180 approach, I should say, where instead of focusing only on what the leader has to do, but it is about the relationship you develop with the persons that you've dealt with. Now, a way for you to look at that is look at your past performance in school, from a very young child to now, and look at the nature of the relationship you had with the teachers that you experienced, or you had the privilege to work with during your time in schooling systems. And I suspect that for those of you who have had good relationships with teachers, you did better in those classes or felt more rewarded in those experiences than people that you have had, or teachers that you've had with whom you've had poor relationships with. So the better the quality of the relationship, the better the outcome for both parties. I don't know if you can make that connection. I mean, any of you all can see that? I mean, who were your favorite teachers? And, what was the relationship like with them? Ms. Thomas, give me some idea if this speaks to you in that manner. Ms. Thomas? No? How about Ms. Bridgman?
So I have an example.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, not so much for me, but for my son, because last year he didn't do so good in his final test, and he never liked the teacher. The teacher was very harsh on them.
Right.
And now that he has a new teacher in the school term, he said he likes the teacher very much. So I felt good that, he would do better this term because he would have a better relationship with the teacher. So
All right. It's something for you to monitor.
yeah.
And you'll be able to test. But what was negative about the relationship with the previous lecturer?
Well,
teacher?
she was a little bit the way she punished them was a little inhumane sometimes.
Wow.
Like she will turn off the fans to make them hot on purpose. And yeah, stuff like that, just because they were making too much noise or something like that.
Noise
So,
and stuff?
yeah. And the classes will be very hot. So, and don't make them have their lunch and keep them in class, and don't make them play. And yeah, she was a bit extra.
And you all, as parents, didn't question that methodology?
Yes, of course we did. We had a big meeting and stuff, and the principal basically just made us feel bad for wanting to have a meeting in the first place, because she said they never had any issues with the teacher before, so we couldn't do anything about it. Just had to let them go through the year with the teacher.
What level was this?
Standard 3.
That doesn't bode well, because that kind of archaic type of punishment system, especially given the environment that they're working in, it doesn't bode well. Something that teacher has to look out for. Right, somebody seems to be trying to get back in. Must be Harry is here. Welcome, Miss Bihari. Hi, somebody's waiting to be let in. Yes, Saida. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone.
I'm Tammy. Welcome.
Now we return from work.
All right, I understand. We've just sort of started presentations, so we find you'll catch up. All right, so this is the definition, and you understand the importance of the quality of the relationship and the impact it's going to likely have on the thing. Now, if I'm not seeing something, rather than just put a message in the chat, just open up your mic and let me know, please. All right. Okay. So when we look at leadership, we can look at leadership from various frameworks. And one of the first frameworks that we always think about leadership is in the area of politics. So when we talk about politics, what we're actually referring to or looking at is how people arrive in positions of power and how they use that power to influence others. That is the nature of leadership when we look at leadership from a political point of view, which is how do you arrive at getting power, and how does that power allow you to influence people? Ms. Clement, welcome back.
Thank you,
All
sir.
right. So here we have a couple of powerful, influential individuals. Each one in the political sphere, they represent very powerful countries. And as the US is always willing to tell us, he's the leader of the most powerful country in the world. So he's the most powerful president in the world, kind of situation. That's the US circumstance. And of course, when you have that level of power, obviously anybody who threatens that position or that status will become a form of an enemy. So which is why Russia and China, who are both powerful countries in themselves, are looked upon as being threats. And therefore we have a lot of tension between these three countries that can develop into wide-scale political problems. Now, recently we had the G20 summit in New Delhi, India, and of course, this was the coming together of a number of leaders from different countries who are looked upon as being the largest and most important economies in the world and important countries, and they get together in order to streamline some of the decisions that they're making and policies that they're developing for the treatment of certain major issues that face the world today. So trade issues come up a lot in these types of meetings. Climate change and climate control issues come up a lot. War comes up a lot because and peace talks come up in relation to that. So these countries, the G20 summits, the NATO conventions, all of these are examples of where we see politics and power and influence be coming to bear in terms of getting things done. So you have that perspective of what leadership is all about. It's about power and influence and how you use your influence to get the objectives that you want to get around you, if we think about it from that perspective. In this image, we're missing the President of the United States and the representative from the European Union, because there are only 18 members here and it's called G20. So there should be 20 representatives. So those are the only two that are missing at this point in time. People were familiar with this meeting that was going on earlier this month. Back to the end of 2 days ago. No? Unaware of this? Wow, interesting. Usually when you have these meetings, there's a lot of press coverage and so on. All right, so another framework that we can look at leadership through is the framework of management. So when we're speaking about management, here we're talking about how effective you are as a manager in achieving the goals and objectives of the organization through the relationship you have with the people who work for you. So not only is it the owner and the workers, but it's also between supervisors and subordinates. Now, some of you all work, hopefully some of you all work in supervisory capacities, or some of you may be working in a more subordinate type of activity. And again, at the end of the day, management is focused on the outcomes, which is if it is a sales-oriented position, then they're looking at the quantity of sales. At the end of the day, the measurement of the success of the management leader or leaders in management is the level of profits that they earn. So this, when we look at images of successful leaders, we see a host of very rich individuals who have, through their business activities, their various business activities, have acquired a lot of wealth. And that wealth becomes the measuring stick that is utilized to determine whether or not you're an effective leader or not. Now, notice I'd say I'm using the term effective leader, and I'm not necessarily saying you're good or bad. Because in business, the good or bad is measured by profits. All right. And profits don't really have money doesn't have a conscience. Let's put it that way. All right. Is that a good measure or good way of looking at leadership? I say probably not. All right. So another framework that we could look at is through anthropology. And this looks at examining leadership from a more historical or even a very distant view. And that view, it focuses on trying to evaluate what or how leadership emerged in societies by looking at the culture that existed, the languages that developed, the tools that we utilized, and the symbols and norms of the past. So whenever we go into a situation where we're examining past civilizations, you're going to find that leadership existed, and how did that leadership come about? Now, in some societies, for example, the most important element, especially if the society was more primitive in nature, that the leaders had to be the strongest individuals in society. And the tools that they would find would be those tools of protection or weapons. Those were the main tools. And their culture would have developed around the culture of that strength. Whereas other cultures that were probably a little more evolved, let's say agrarian or agricultural based societies, it will be the individuals who were able to maximize the amount of growth and wheat and crops that they were able to get, who rose to the more leadership positions. And the tools that they would have developed might have been farming implements, and of course the language and stuff would have developed and rotated around that here. Now, if we were to say fast forward to the next 1,000 years, and somebody was looking back on our society today, what do you think would be the view of those anthropologists of our society? How did our leaders emerge in our society? Well, one of the ways is, well, let's look at a simple thing that we could look at is what would have been the key tool that they would find as being our source of getting things done. And you'd find that this might be the tool, yeah, that everybody's using now. And in this tool, how you ended up getting into leadership positions was likes. Would you agree with that? If you have a channel or you have any social media accounts, be it Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or what's the other one, TikTok or all the whichever ones they have now, because there are so many other that are emerging. The amount of thumbs up and likes that you get determines you to become a leader in whatever aspect of activity you find yourself involved in. And it's going to be interesting if 1,000 years from now, maybe, if we were to look at ourselves from that perspective, what is important to us? I mean, the whole thing about it would be when anthropologists look at it, they look at our language. So in terms of looking at our language, they're going to have to be able to evaluate emojis and LOL codes and that kind of stuff. The physicality of the individual in terms of our physical development, we find that we're very sedentary in nature. We're not as physically fit or physically active as previous incarnations of humans. The tools, in terms of the things that would gather, would be a whole set of of digital equipment. I mean, if you look in your own home, the amount of digital and AV equipment that surrounds you. Like right now, I'm surrounded by printers, hard drives, speakers, microphones, uh, audio cables, lights, all kind of crap around me right now. If we were to freeze me in this thing and I'm sitting in this gamer's chair and all kind of nonsense, it if I was frozen in time and I was examined now by anthropologists coming back to find our past, they would find me in the midst of this environment, speaking to a microphone and speaking to the wall, literally. And they may not understand that based upon where their society would have gone. So we have to think about it from that particular point of view, from the anthropological point of view and through the archaeology that we collect. It tells a story about the nature of leadership and the nature of life that existed or exists in various time frames. And what we decide becomes important for us. So anthropology is a very nice, interesting way to look at leadership from that perspective. Another framework that we utilize to evaluate history, evaluate leadership, is history. And what we're going to be looking at here is we're going to be looking at people who rose to to influential positions or became great leaders, especially when they were dealing with some sort of major social change or social activity or significant activities in that time. So here we have a couple of people from a particular time frame. These are individuals who were critical leaders during a time frame called World War II. Do you all recognize? Anybody recognize all of these individuals? No, maybe, possibly. Anybody recognizes anybody here?
Hitler.
Just open your. Yep.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
well,
Hitler.
Hitler is the guy with the mustache, right? Fine. What about the guy on the left? Who's this guy over here?
Stalin.
Who?
Is that Stalin?
Stalin. S-T-A-L-I-N. Joseph Stalin. Yes. Leader of which country?
Russia.
Go ahead, speak out now. Whoever that is. You have the right answer.
Russia.
Russia. Very good. Excellent. And then you have Churchill, who is the leader of Great Britain, and you have Roosevelt, who was the leader of the United States. The three here, the United States, England, and Russia formed the allies who came together to deal with the threat of the Nazi movement led by Hitler during the Second World War. And then look at where we are today. Russia has, at that point in time, eventually became the Soviet Union. And there was a wall that arose that separated the West from the East and that kind of stuff. And even today, we still have a great deal of animosity between Russia and the rest of the world. So things that took place here affected our current situations in terms of the nature of leadership. Now, prior to World War II, Britain or England was the leading nation in the world. They were the British Empire, so to speak. And America, during that period of time, actually began to rise up to become the most powerful nation in the country, in the world at that point in time. And part of what caused that was the arrangements that came into being that placed the US currency at the center of all trade. And that was where the switch over from the British Empire into the American time frame took place. So obviously all these other countries have had visions of becoming empire developers at that point in time. So those are critical things. And today we have the, I don't know if anybody's following the development of the BRICS and their movement towards setting up their own currency to get away from the US currency and the threat that that poses to the US and the actions that have been taken in relation to that. All right, who knows this gentleman here?
Martin Luther King.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And what social movement is he dealing with? What social movement? Anybody recognizes it? The civil rights movement in the United States in the 60s. All right, remember he was assassinated as a result of his activities there. Due to that. What about this individual? Anybody knows him? A nice picture of him, actually.
Stokely Carmichael, sir.
Stokely Carmichael, right? What's his name now? No, don't remember Kwame Ture. All right. What was he involved in?
Black Panthers.
The Black Panthers, right, or the Black Power movement, as part of the civil rights movement in the United States. But what makes him more critical or important for us is that he brought that Black Panther power, Black Power movement to Trinidad for the empowerment of Black people in Trinidad, especially in light of the colonial movement that we came from, or the colonial background that we came from. All right, so important individual who brought a lot of change in the society that he came from. But he started his movement in the United States as a student in the Berkeley College there, and part of the Black Power and the Black Panthers, that type of stuff. You want to know a little bit more about him? You could look at a film called The Black Klansman, where he and his activities was featured as part of the stuff that took place with that film. All right, these are other influential people throughout history. Good few of them you might recognize, some of them you might not agree with, some of them you might like what they did, but their activities had long-standing impacts on major parts of the world around us, and the impact that they ended up having just maintained or stayed working with us throughout long parts of our history. So hopefully you recognize a good few of them. Mahatma Gandhi, we have Hitler, we have Armstrong, you have Karl Marx and Lenin there. We have Mother Teresa, you have Roosevelt, you have Churchill, you have, again, we have Martin Luther King, Mandela, you have Ian Botham here, you have Thatcher. I think this is not Ian Botham, this is Cecil Roach. So interesting. He's positioned against Mandela here because he was one of the people who ran the South Africa and created that apartheid system that existed in the situation. So I have a host of different people. If you go into the area of entertainment, you have Walt Disney, Marilyn Monroe, the Beatles, and Elvis. Those people, all of these individuals, played pivotal roles in their industries and therefore influenced the nature of how those industries worked after the fact. That makes sense? All right, so now one of the last areas that we're going to look at is the area of psychology and sociology, because work done in those fields by some of these gentlemen here, Freud, Karl Marx, and B.F. Skinner, they contributed a lot of the concepts and ideas that we're going to be looking at in leadership, because most of the theories that we look at here have or come from work done from these people and information that is done, especially B.F. B.F. Skinner, because he did a lot of work in adult education and that had a lot to do with leadership there. So those are the frameworks under which we can look at leadership. Now, how does your field of study approach leadership? All right. And how would you approach leadership? Now, if you're in the management field, we already understand what management looks at. It looks at outcomes based. But what about if you're involved in an NGO circumstance or situation? How would an NGO, a non-governmental organization or non-profit organization, look at leadership in terms of, are there any individuals here who are actively involved in some form of social work, for example, or community work, member of a church group, that type of stuff? Nobody here involved in any of that stuff? Wow. Yes, Janelle.
So I belong to two volunteer groups, but the one that I'm most active with, it's called REACT. It's Radio Emergency Associated Communications Team. So we mainly deal with communications.
Right, that's
Most of
CB
the
and
time.
that kind of stuff, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Most of the time, it would be during an emergency. So
Correct.
with the flooding, we're majorly active. However, we also do communications for NCC around carnival time,
Right.
as well as we do volunteer for some events, like if there's walks around the savannah, because we're situated St. George County.
Right.
In terms of leadership, we have an executive, an appointed executive. So we do voting. We have president, first vice, second vice.
Right. So
going
that's the
down the
process
line.
of leadership. But how
Yeah.
do people find themselves in positions of leadership? What makes other people want to put somebody else in a leadership position?
Mostly how they operate within the team, because we have different committees. So the technical committee, if you take it upon yourself to spearhead something, like you want to give a training, you already have training in a certain field, and you decide you want to offer your services throughout the group, and you tell people, I'm doing this training, I'll do it for you all. They look at you and they think, okay, this person has leadership qualities, and somebody else from the team may nominate them and say they would do good in this position.
Right. So that's to
As
do
well
with their
as
willingness to help, right?
yes, as well as most of the time they choose long-standing members. So there's the junior part of the React team. So I was once a junior reactor, and I was also once I was the president. Yes, I was the president for that board. But they based that off of my time I was there. So I was the only junior reactor for a very long time. And seeing as I had most of the knowledge as the happenings within the team, they appointed me. It wasn't
Right,
really much
good.
of a vote. They appointed me. With the regular executive, they would have had the directors look at the group of people who were there, junior, as well as the regular side of the team. And if they also saw the capabilities within them, if they attended the shows or they were always out on the field, passing communications the correct way, following instructions the correct way, they would say, okay, I think you should go up for this position.
Right. So it's through recommendation and peer support, right?
Yes.
But but it's based upon expertise. Hopefully, and not
yes,
not,
very much so.
Right. Not who know who kind of nonsense. Right. It's not on a pally. Yeah, right. It's not on a pally system. But so that's an important. That's a really interesting way in which leadership approaches come up. That's excellent. I like that. I like that. That thing. All right. So we're gonna start looking at the relational leadership model. And the model that we're looking at as we move forward, we're going to refer to this as the RLM model, or the relational leadership model. The model sits heavily with work that we talked about before, psychological work coming out of the society area, and educational framework, as I talked about with B.F. Skinner, because there's a connection between the two that is required for the relational leadership model to work. It is going to require learning about yourself, which is the first presentation, chapter 4, that you're going to be doing. Self-awareness in the context of others, that is chapter 5, understanding others. understanding your personal values, beliefs, and commitments. That's chapter 6 on ethics and ethical values. So all of these concepts are going to be dealt with in different chapters, but they sit on this framework. The framework sets upon understanding who you are, understanding what people think of you and why they think of you that way, and understanding your own value structure and your own ethical values that you have. Now, so therefore, that requires that for us to develop as leaders, we need to become self-aware. We have to practice self-effective listening. We have to be able to collaborate effectively. And that collaboration implies that we are able to practice compromises or effect compromises and put all of those things into practice, because it makes it very difficult, because some of this stuff that we're talking about here is not very easy to do. Now, self-awareness is something that sometimes is painful for some people. For other people, it's just a sense of getting to know each other. How many people here do any kind of journaling, but writes a diary or ever so often goes through a period of self-reflection? Yes, that's Colleen. You do a diary. Talk about that. Share with us a little bit about your experience with that.
It's somewhat more of like a journal scrapbook.
Right.
Where, say, if it's like for a week period, we do pictures, stickers, or write events that happen throughout the week and reflect on it.
All right. In what context are you doing that? That's just that you do, or is it a requirement for something else?
No, it's just something that I do.
All right, good. Now, I wanted you to stay there, and I want you to try and explain to everybody, what do you understand by effective listening? Because of all the things here, this is probably the hardest one. How do we effectively listen to others? Any common communication people here in this class? Now, all of you all should have done RIT and maybe Common 1.8 so far. Any of you all did that?
Yes, sir.
No? Yeah. Who did Common 1.8? Who was that? Who was speaking? Right. Well, yes, sir is not just not enough of an answer. So what does effective listening mean, and what does it entail?
So
Yes, Natoya.
I think it's just to listen to understand what the person is saying. Basically.
That's what you think? And how do you go about doing that? There's a very go ahead.
I guess for me, if I want to listen and understand what somebody's saying, I will just be quiet and have nothing to say and just focus on the words, I guess.
Okay. St. John, I see your hand up. What would you like to contribute?
Could it be that you're listening without any kind of judgment?
There you go. That is probably the most important element of effective listening. You must listen without the frame of reference that you normally carry around with you to evaluate things. You have to listen without judgment. It's called suspension of personal beliefs, or suspension of judgment, or suspension of your own frame of reference. Now, that is the most difficult thing to do, especially if the individual that is communicating with you is communicating utilizing in a topic or in an area or in a manner that is offensive to you. And it's even worse if it's somebody who's close to you, somebody you have a relationship with, because your emotional reactions is a form of judgment, and those reactions prevent you from truly listening to somebody. Now, how many of you all understand what I'm talking about there, or would agree with with what I'm talking about. Let's suppose somebody close to you in your family. Yes, Melanie.
No, sir, I agree fully.
Yeah, but you just can't agree. You have to comment. You have to add your 2 cents. All right, so think about it from this perspective. You have a sibling or you have a cousin or somebody who, you know, you all have a good close relationship, and they come up to you and they start to tell you that they think that their gender is wrong, and they believe that they are you know, some, and this might be infuriating to some people. How you all understand what I'm talking about? This is something that this is somebody who you know, who you're probably grown up with, suddenly starting to tell you something that you have no patience with. And that this is something that you all are probably going to have to deal with on a more regular basis. That you're going to come across people talking about things and confronting you about things that you have no patience with. You don't understand why that we're even having this conversation, but yet still as a leader, you're going to have to deal with the fact that they are coming to you with that information, or they're coming to you with that thing, and you have to be able to practice effective listening. This is a very important element of your development as a leader and as a person in general. If you want to be a good friend to any individual, you have to be able to listen effectively to others. Ms. Victor, you agree with that? Disagree? How do you feel about it?
So I agree.
You agree? Why do you agree? Have you experienced the difficulties of trying to listen to somebody?
Yes, sir, sometimes, especially my sister.
Yes. The closer they are to you, the more difficult it is to effectively listen. When you don't have a vested interest in somebody, it's not as hard, but it can still be challenging. Especially if they're coming to you to talk about, or they are espousing ideas and concepts that you you don't agree with or you don't like. That's something that you have to pay attention to. All right, okay. Power and that kind of stuff. But if you really think about it, a lot of your life is determined by how the decisions that are made by these individuals. It just didn't seem to matter at that point in time. But consider, for example, the quality of life that you've experienced based upon the decisions made by your parents or your guardians. That's the kind of leadership that we have to be concerned with as well. But we have to also recognize that different people and in different circumstances will value leadership differently and view leadership differently, as either being important, critical, or it could just go by itself kind of thing. We also have to recognize that leadership is not a static thing, it is flexible. We as leaders have to understand that different types or different settings call for different types of leadership styles or actions. And that the most important element is that leadership is a skill that can be learned and developed. A lot of people still believe that leaders are born, not made. And that's something that we're going to be looking at in more detail, possibly during our debate activities. So for you to become a good leader, we have to be committed to very high ethical standards. And our ethical standards need to be utilized to encourage change in other individuals and represents or reflect the kind of social responsibility we want for everybody in our society. Now, critical thinking, that's a very important element. The ability to look at complex information and work out, what's important, what's not, what's critical, what's not, and work out reasoning behind why things are taking place and make those connections takes time to develop, and it requires fair amount of skill. Credibility and authenticity, integrity, they're all connected to each other, because your credibility has to do with how believable you are as an individual. Your authenticity deals with your truthfulness and honesty, and all of those impact upon your integrity, because they are all interwoven with each other, your integrity and so on, and it's connected to how you behave with your ethical conduct. So you can't be in different circumstances in different places and behave differently, because it starts to affect your credibility and authenticity. Consider, for example, your behavior when you're out partying as opposed to when you're at work. Do you behave differently? And is one set of behaviors only appropriate in one area and not appropriate in other time frames? That's something that you as a leader need to think about in terms of your behavior and how you go about running things in your life. But the model that we're looking at requires that we maintain very high standards of behavior, ethical values, all right? And that starts with the process of developing of this type of thing. It starts, first of all, with the knowing process. It's a three-phase process of knowing, being, and doing, all right? The first part of knowing, of course, is know yourself, know how things change and why they change, and know how and why other people see things differently to you. And that's important, because you don't need to judge other people and get upset about it, but if you understand why other people see things differently, it'll probably make your life a whole lot better. Let's look at this image here. What do you all see? Latoya, what you seeing here? Or real?
Well, seeing two things: a lady
Right.
looking at herself, reflection in a mirror, and a skull.
Right. Everybody else seeing that? Ria, Samantha?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you're all seeing the two images there? Great. Is there anybody who's having difficulty seeing the two images she spoke about?
Yeah.
The lady look. All right, okay, let's look at this. What do we see here? Let me ask Vidal.
A young lady.
A young lady doing what?
I think her face is looking away.
So she seems to be looking over her shoulder. All right, cool. You seeing anything else, Vidal?
I think I saw this picture already. I think there's an old lady as well present.
Well, are you seeing it? What
Not
do
right
you see?
now. A young lady.
Anybody? All right. You seen a young lady looking over her shoulder. Anybody else seen that young lady looking over her shoulder?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Me too.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask a question. Anybody else seen something else?
No.
Yes.
Somebody said yes. Who was that?
Said yes. St. John. I am actually
Said-
seeing an old lady looking down.
Are you also seeing the woman looking, the young lady looking off to the side? St. John?
Yeah, I'm
St.
seeing
John.
both
You're
images.
seeing both? Okay, good. Excellent. Anybody else seen that old lady looking down?
Yes, sir.
Who's yes, sir?
Matura, sir.
Matura, you're seeing the old lady looking down? Who's not
Yes,
seeing the
sir.
old lady? Be honest, this is a perception
So
exercise.
I am not seeing the old lady.
Who else is not seeing the old lady?
So I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
So I'm not seeing it neither.
All right, Janelle. All right, so Janelle, follow me here
I'm
and
not
see if
seeing it.
everybody else could. Who's seeing? Who was that? Tammy? Tammy,
Yes,
just say
sir,
what
I'm
you said.
not seeing it either.
You're not seeing, but
I'm
you're
not
seeing the young. You see the young lady looking over her shoulder, right?
I'm seeing a young lady looking over her shoulder.
All right, so work with me here. Watch, close your eyes. And for those of you who are not seeing the old lady, just close your eyes. Now open it up and listen to what I'm saying to you. This is the coat that the person is wearing. This dark shaded area here. This here is a mouth. It's a sad mouth. This clear area here is her chin. This is her nose. These
I
are
know
her, these are her eyes. This is the hair that's poking out from under her shawl, and this is the feather that's sticking out from it. Everybody else is seeing the old lady now? These
Yes,
are the
sir.
eyes. You seeing it?
I have
This,
now seen it. Now chin up. Now seeing it.
right, good. Love that, because that means that it takes an effort to be able to see things that might be embedded in front of us. They're right there in front of us, but because we're probably unaccustomed to evaluating things in that manner, we can only see what is likely to present itself. A lot of people say whatever you see first in this photograph is indicative of how you feel about life. That's the question that comes up with it. But this is another one here that's even clearer. This is why it is important as a leader for you to recognize that you need to see what other people are seeing, because from their perception or from their point of view, what they're seeing is right. Because these two people are arguing the same thing, 6 and 9. But based upon where you stand, it's either 6 or 9. And the only way, as if you were the person who was saying 6 all the time, would see the 9, you need to walk around and look at it from their perspective. And that is something that we need to recognize as being an important part of understanding other people, because we oftentimes write people off based upon what we think we see things as, and not trying to understand why the other person is seeing it from the way they are. And that understanding brings a little more clarity and brings a little more peace in your life. I understand that as well. Because if you're constantly button heads with other people, then there's a reason why. And you need to probably take some time and try to see things from their point of view. It's easy to talk about now, but it's difficult to do because it requires a sense of saying, okay, maybe I'm not, maybe my perception is not the only perception that exists, and that's part of the problem that a lot of us face, because we meet a lot of people who are very adamant with their point of view about things, and they're unwilling to see other person's point of views. And that is the danger that we face. We cannot become that person that is so foolhardy to think that their view of things is the only view of things. I'm not saying you have to agree with their view, but what I'm saying is you need to understand why their view exists in that particular way. That makes sense? That's a challenge that you're going to have to face as part of the knowing part. So the other part here, we talked about the second part of this developmental process is the being part. You must be ethical, principled, open, caring, and inclusive. So we talked about ethical and principled. They're kind of related to each other. But open, caring, and inclusive is a broad field that challenges most people, because we live in a society where differences are not necessarily seen as a good thing. And as a good leader, it is important that we must be open, caring, and inclusive of all people, especially those people with whom we have problems or we don't agree with their point of view in life. That is where the challenge becomes much more difficult. Opening ourselves up to people with whom their point of view we have problems with, and being inclusive with them. All right, that is a major challenge that you're going to have to deal with as leaders moving forward. And the reason is, as this guy, Richard Branson, who is he's the CEO of Virgin Records and Virgin Atlantic, Virgin Airlines as well. Having a personality of caring about people is important. You cannot be a good leader unless you like people, and you have to express to them that you care about them. That's the only way you can be a good leader, is if you care about people, regardless of what background they're coming from. Now, the last element is the doing part of the developmental process. We know we have to understand, we know these, we have the knowing part where we have to know ourselves and know others. We have the being part, all right, the being ethical, being principled, being open, caring, and inclusive. And this last part is we must act on what we believe and what we understand. So we must act in a social responsible manner, consistently and congruently, which means every time we come across a particular issue, we must act consistently. And regardless of the circumstance we find it coming up with, must be congruent, meaning that in all walks of life, we behave the same way, or we act in the same manner. And we have to look at this in all elements of our activities, as part of your community, as part of your family, as part of the wider environment that you're working in. All of those things we have to be consistent and congruent along with. Those are quite important. And you have to be committed to what you're talking about. So you're going to be acting socially responsible on your commitments and passions. Because sometimes, because we're highly committed to something or highly passionate about something, we might give a little, we can't, or we ought not to. Those are the challenges that face us. So when we talk about social responsibility, we're talking about, as a leader, we have to pursue ideals and outcomes beyond the organizational ideals and outcomes that you have to work with. So if we take, for instance, O'Connor's situation, where we're talking about the REAC committee, they have their own objectives. Now, it may not be profit generation, but they still have to operate within the realm of what their goals and objectives are. But they have to make sure that in doing what they're doing, they cannot negatively impact the wider society around them, which means they can't be putting up radio antennas and that type of stuff that might interfere with broadcasting of other people around them, or interfere with reception that other people might. So, for example, I know people with high-powered CBs have a tendency to interrupt free-to-air signals for televisions. You're aware of that, Janelle? Was it Janelle who was the REAC member? Is still there? Maybe? No?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah. You're aware of that those high-powered CB generators can be disruptive to other signals around you?
Yes, sir. There have been many a time, especially during Carnival, we would be communicating right in the savannah, and then you just randomly start hearing radio music playing in the radios that we are using to operate with.
Yep, and that's because there's a cross movement of signals, correct? In terms of
yes, correct.
Interference. So another thing is that a lot of that equipment utilizes a lot of lithium batteries, correct?
Yes, sir.
A lot of radios, right? So disposing of lithium batteries in a environmentally safe manner is going to be an important element. So this is what we talk about being socially responsible. That what we do must be done with the full knowledge that our activities, though we are achieving the goals and objectives of the organization, we have to look beyond that and look at the way in which we affect the world around us. And that's something that that we have to pay attention to. Now, though we just spoke about those three steps, leadership cannot be reduced to those particulars. Just simple follow step 1, step 2, step 3 kind of situation. You have to think about this in terms of development and in terms of looking at your life. You have to really think about this as something that it has to be ongoing across the board, because it's a way of thinking, it's a way of life you have to develop, a personal philosophy of leadership, core values that don't change and waver. Process requires that we need to understand paradigms of hard work not being the way in which we are. I mean, in the past, we were always told if you want to achieve anything in life, you have to work hard. You have to go beyond hard work. We have to work smart. So when we talk about that in leadership, we have to recognize that in order to achieve the objectives that you want to do, we have to work hard, yes, but we have to work smarter. We have to work collectively smarter, reflectively smarter, and spiritually smarter. Now, what does that mean? Collectively smarter, and this is one that's difficult, especially for students who engage in a lot of group activity. They don't get this. Collectively smarter means and implies that collectively groups are more intelligent than individuals, regardless of how much information any one individual has in terms of their knowledge base. That individual is limited to what they know. And all of us are smarter than one of us. We have to accept that as a given, which is why collectively we are better than individually. That we have to start with that premise. Reflectively smarter. That means we have to oftentimes, or we should be taking time to look back on how things happened in the past to be able to make sure that we can repeat successes and avoid failures. So it's important that we reflect on past activities to improve our next go round. So a lot of times we don't do that. When's the last time any of you all reflected on your past semesters to see what you did right, what you did wrong, to try and make sure that you improve things? Or do we just continue going in a never-ending cycle of repetitive errors that we continue making? All right. Sort of like if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thinking. Yes, even though it's not broken, it still should be looking back and saying, okay, well, maybe you could tweak this, or maybe you could tweak that kind of stuff to make things better. It's important that we utilize reflection as a tool to be able to improve how we do things. Spiritually smarter doesn't speak to about our religious beliefs, but what it speaks to is our core beliefs, our core values. If you ever want to see or know what somebody's core principles are, look at their behavior when things go bad. How they behave and what they do during that period tells you what is the most important values and principles that they believe. So if you ever look at films where they put people in these extreme circumstances, which is most films, put people in conflict, what are the go-to behaviors of the individual? That is what we're talking about. But think about it in life. When you go through rough things in life, when you go through bad things in life, what are your go-to behaviors, activities, reactions? That speaks to what your core values are. And we need to be aware of them, because in some instances we might need to curb them because our core response might be violence. It might be to hit back. So we need to be aware of that so that we can modify our behavior in the future to make sure that, okay, we recognize that reaction when I get upset to hit back either physically or verbally or emotionally is not necessarily a good response that I want to continue doing. I need to make those kind of changes. All right, so that's something that we want to think about there from that perspective as well. So when we talked about paradigms, what is a paradigm? A paradigm is a way in which we go about looking at things. And the current paradigm of leadership is one where a lot of people look at leadership as something that is not for me, that is other people activities, that the paradigm of you know, have to be born into leadership positions. Those paradigms don't make much sense anymore. So a paradigm shift is when we move away from one method of thinking about things to something that we believe we ought to be going to. So paradigm shifting is very important. So a paradigm shift in terms of the leadership development process is to think more about leadership not as what the leader does, but what the followers do. Because if you think about any leadership position, you will not achieve anything if you have no followership behind you. So leadership is not something a leader possesses so much as a process that involves the followership that works with them. Followership, therefore, is leadership in action amongst peoples and groups. So if you think about any leader in any group, right, even in a family, a parent, if the followership does not agree and does not work or is not willing to work with the leadership, you're not going to get anything done. So we have to start thinking about leadership, not about what the leader does, but what the followers do as being critical. So what are the different types of followers that you come across? Now, I like to harken this model here that we're looking at to how people behave in groups. When you all get group activities to do, which you do almost in every class, right? So you have the politician, the partner, the subordinate, or the contributor. Now, who are you? Think of yourself and think of people in the groups that you've probably worked with in the past. Relational initiative speaks to the ability of the individual to work well with others and develop good relationships. Performance initiative has to do with their ability to actually work on the material and understand it and put out the output required that the group project might require, or the activity requires. So, you know, reading, understanding, researching, writing up the findings and so on. So you have 4 follower types that the text identifies. You have the politician and the partner. The politician is very good with the relationship building, but very poor on performance. The partner is the person who is good at both. They are really good at developing relationships, and they're also very performance driven. So that's a really good person to be with. The contributor, that is like the person who's really good at doing research and writing papers, but they're really bad at presenting and working with other people. Some of you all might fall into that category. And then you have the subordinate who's good at nothing. And as a leader, you have to be able to recognize that these are the potential types of individuals you're going to encounter. And we need to understand how best can I utilize those individuals to be able to get the goals and objectives, because each person here has the ability to contribute, but they contribute differently. So you might find in your group you have a set of contributors, which means those are the individuals that can do a lot of the bull work, because they don't want the pain of having to work on relationships and present work and that kind of stuff. So you might combine contributors with politicians, so that the politician will deal with the presentation element, work on the relational issues, and deal with, assist with, you know, pulling together the information that the contributors like. And you might like to probably put partners and subordinates together, because partners are good at everything. And they will be able to pull the subordinates along and make sure that they are either going to be good at contributing or be good at relationship development. The trouble with partners, however, that a lot of leaders have, is that partners are strong individuals within a group, and they're oftentimes looked upon as being a threat to the leadership of the organization. Leaders ought not to look at partners as being that, but a threat, but More importantly, a partner is somebody with whom you can leave more responsibility, and you can actually look as potentially, when in your absence, being the leader. So it's sort of like succession planning with anything. If you stop looking at them as threats, that is going to be a good thing. Now, another model, this is the Hyacinth model here, looks at followers more from a political standpoint, where you have different types of followers. Again, loyalists, sycophants, critics, opportunists, spectators, traitors, and realists. So again, the principle is the same. As a leader in a political organization or political type organization, or an organization that has a fair amount of politics attached to it, as which is most things in life, you need to be able to identify the kind of follower that you have and be able to utilize their natural tendencies to assist you to achieve the goals that you want to get done. You have to look out for the sycophants because they're only there for whatever they can get. But you might be able to use sycophants to be able to get other things done. So again, I'm not going to go through the methodology, but it's what a leader needs to look at in terms of followership. Now, you would hope that you don't get a lot of negative types of followers, but you get a good complement of positive and possibly negative as well. That's something that you're hoping for. Now, what are the responsibilities of good followers, effective followers? One, to offer support to leaders, not just face value support, but true support. Take initiative. Don't wait for the leader to tell you to do something. Go and do it on your own, or take the initiative. This needs to be done, get it done. Playing counselor and coaching roles. That is not just only to the other followers or other people in the organization, but also with the leader. Counsel the leader, coach the leader on things they may need help with, or when they want to have a sounding board. Those are part of the responsibilities that followers need to be. Raise issues and concerns when necessary. Don't back away from sticky questions and difficult issues, because they need to be dealt with. If we all utilize that head in the sand approach to things, we're not going to be able to deal with those issues and challenges when they come up if we don't raise them. Because if we raise them, it gives us a chance to strategize how to deal with them when they come forward. Seek and encourage honest feedback. This is a strange one because a lot of people don't really like honest feedback. Honesty is a problem for a lot of people, but you should, as a follower, respect honest feedback coming from the leader and from other followers. Clarify your rules and expectations. Know why you're there and what you're expected to do as a follower. What are you supposed to be doing? Show appreciation to the leader as well as other followers. That's something that as a follower in organizations, we tend to not necessarily tell the leader, hey, you did a good job, kind of thing like that. And followers, leaders have to do the same thing too. All right, keep the leader informed. I remember there was a case where we had an exam that went off and something went wrong with the exam. And we didn't inform the president of the college that there was a problem with one of those. It was one of the common math exams that people had, and it led to some students who felt very put off by the fact that they had to go and repeat this exam later on in the semester. They went to the radio stations and started to make a whole set of noise the following morning. In fact, that same night when it happened, they went on radio, and because one of the students was a radio personality, and he brought up the discussion on his radio program, and it found its way into major discussion in the following morning, and it led to an absolute stink. And the Minister of Education got involved with it, and all because we didn't tell the president. He got so pissed with us in relation to that. It was, because he got blindsided by a call in the morning, from the minister or the permanent secretary from the ministry, asking what the hell going on here? Why are we getting blasted all over the media? So that's something that that you ought to keep in mind. You know, the leader can only make good decisions if the leader has all information, and that's important. Resist inappropriate influences of the leader. Yes, so if your leader likes to go and do bad things or you know, hey, let's go take a drink, and doing so they start to fraternize with other members of other groups or with other followers. It's something that you need to know what is appropriate and what is inappropriate behavior, and therefore resist the inappropriate behaviors that a leader, because some leaders, especially if you have the sycophant type or the sheep kind of individual, they have a tendency to just follow along. And if you just follow along, you can find yourself getting involved with some really nefarious types of activities that you don't necessarily want to. All right, follower competencies. So those are your responsibilities. These are the competencies. Display loyalty, functions well in change-oriented environment, functions well on teams, critical, can think independently and critically. That's important. We don't want sheep. We want people who can actually act upon and think about things critically and considers integrity of paramount importance. So we want these critical values that followers should have. So if those are the things that how we're describing a follower, is follower the best term to use to describe that person? So the question is, what would you suggest? How should we refer to them rather than followers? What's another word we can use or phrase we can use to describe those individuals? Anybody has an idea? My suggestion is an associate. What might be yours? Anybody? Somebody, come on.
So supporter.
Supporters, right? Yeah, that might be a good idea. Anybody else? Don't all rush now.
So like an assistant, kind of?
Yeah, although assistant sounds a little derogatory, but yeah, I guess rather than your employee, this is my assistant, this is my associate, sounds a little better. Yeah, these are supporters. This is my fans. I don't know. Y'all think about it, because if you are in an organization and you keep on referring to people in subordinate type language, then they may start to behave in that subordinate type language. But if you find a way to uplift their position and make it almost equivalent, my colleague, that's one that we utilize.
Allies.
Say that again, Randall.
Allies.
Allies, yeah, okay. Although allies in the form of an organization might be a little tricky to utilize. You know how we have that thing, but this is my ride or die, my horse kind of situation. Think about it from that perspective in terms of
An advocate.
say again, Jenna?
An advocate.
Advocate. Well, no, advocates have a very specific meaning. But I like some of the ideas, and they're not bad. I mean, at least you're thinking in those kind of things. Really cool. All right, so this is another grouping of evaluation that another model. This is the Kelvy's model of follow behavior, and this is done on a positive to negative scale of independent critical thinking to dependent on critical thinking, and active to passive behaviors. All right. So effective followers are critical thinkers who are actively involved in the organization, as opposed to sheep who are passive and don't think critically. You also have, on the opposite side, people who are quite active, but they don't think or are unable to critically think. Those are the yes people. And then, of course, you have alienated followers who are critical, independent thinkers, but they have sort of step away from actively participating in the group. So what you really want is to try and have as many people in the area of being effective followers. Survivors are people who just sort of like eventually fall into the one group or the other. But you don't want to have too many sheep and yes people, because that means that you're not going to get anybody who's going to bring you up when you're making mistakes or warn you when things go wrong. You don't want alienated followers. In political parties, a lot of people, in terms of the politics of an organization or the politics of the country, you might find a lot of people fall into the alienated followers. They think critically, they make very independent decisions, but their participation in the processes become very passive in nature. So it's something that you want to be paying attention to in terms of that. All right. So now we come to the leadership and their style. So we have 6 styles of leadership: the classical approaches, which is laissez-faire, autocratic, and participative; situational, emergent, transactional, transformational, visionary. Now, the takeaway from this is that regardless, any leader can use any of these styles. The styles that they're utilizing should be dependent upon the circumstances in which you have to operate. In some instances, for example, a leader has to be more autocratic in their behavior, especially if they have time crunches. Most times you'd probably like to be more participative in your behavior, but timeframes don't allow for it. So sometimes some autocratic behavior is required. The idea is you don't get stuck in one area and behave only that way. That's the kind of leadership program or leadership style you want to kind of to be more flexible with: laissez-faire, autocratic, participative. Situational would be the circumstances brings about a leadership behavior. Emergent would be those leaders that emerge given circumstances and situations over time and then fade away as those times change. Transactional leaders are those people who utilize a lot of transactional negotiations to be able to get things done. A lot of our leaders work, especially in managerial fields. Transactional approaches tend to be more appealing to a lot of people. Transformational leadership requires a lot more motivational activities because you're asking people to make changes they don't necessarily want to, because change is the one thing in life that is constant, but most of us as individuals prefer not to make change because we get comfortable with how things are now. Visionary people or visionary leaders are those people who have the capacity to develop very vivid, active pictures of a reality that is yet to exist. So they have to be able to paint those pictures and convince people to want to achieve that. So there are different types of leadership styles. But very good visionary leaders, for example, tend to be very poor sometimes in their actual day-to-day activities because they're really good at painting the pictures, but the nitty-gritty escapes them. So they're good at the macro view of things, but they're very poor at the micro elements of managing a circumstance or managing a situation. So it means that you have to be able to move between all forms to be a really good leader. Really good leader. You have to be able to utilize all the different styles. All right. Again, any leader, as defined by this, is any person who's actively engaged with others to accomplish change. Now, we'll look in the future because change is not defined as being positive or negative, but change is just change. All right. For now, purpose of leaders: to motivate employees. We spoke about that before. Attain organizational goals, because if you don't, you're a failure. Ensure that the rules that govern your behavior and govern the actions of the organization are adhered to. Provides continuity and momentum, meaning that we ensure that we continue to move from one objective to the other and we continue to move at a particular pace. Embrace and foster change, one of the challenges that we always face, that will work to the common good. Is socially responsible, is civically engaged, and is displays civic responsibility. So let's look at that in a little more detail. Socially responsible is the personal commitment of the leader to the well-being of the people beyond the organization, to the world outside of the organization, and the general public good of of our society. That is our social responsibility. So whatever we do, we have to keep those things in mind. Civic engagement is an individual with a heightened sense of responsibility for all of the communities in which they participate. Working community, social, family, community. So it means that we are civically engaged in making sure we do certain things like this. So for example, you have voluntary services. Now, O'Connor spoke about that. That's a really nice piece of civil action that you can take to be able to help you develop your community. And it doesn't have to be things like REACT. It could be other things where, you know, get involved with cleanup activities and looking after various, you know, doing like a garden in the area, that type of stuff. Civic commitment to duties, the willingness to make positive contributions to our society, the ability to be involved in civil society, politics, and democracy in a meaningful and civil manner. And of course, to develop a sense of trust and bonding with others with a sense of reciprocity. So we give and we get. So that reciprocity is that we give and we pass it on or pay it forward kind of situation that we look at there. Civic responsibility, the sense of personal responsibility that you hold or leaders should hold to uphold their obligations as part of the community. So there are a whole pile of things to do that. As somebody within the country, for example, going to school, obeying the laws, when called upon to serve on a jury, you do so. Paying your taxes. A lot of us don't see these things as being part of being civil responsibilities that we have. You know, voting, displaying patriotism, getting involved in community service. You know, we spoke about voting before. Serving in the military. Now, we don't have that serving in the military as a requirement. There are some countries that it is a requirement that you participate in military activity for a period of time. In Canada, for example, young men had to participate. Young people actually have to be part of the reserves for a little while to have some level of military training during their growing up. There are other countries that have that. They were talking about trying that here in Trinidad, but there's been a lot of backlash on that to do mandatory military service as part of the growing process or schooling system. All right, now, question. Should a leader know everything? The simple answer to that is no. It'd be impractical to believe that any one person, leader or not, should know everything about everything. That therefore means that leaders have to be, and organizations and other people have to be open to the fact that we have to constantly be learning. And that all of us are smarter than one of us means that in a group, people would know things that you don't know, and you need to be open enough and sensible enough to understand that if they know something, let them teach you and share that information. That's another thing that happens sometimes. In an organization, we have to make sure that everybody, including the leader, is willing to learn, to be open to learning, to making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, and more importantly, sharing knowledge that will help to make the whole group better. So that's something that you have to pay attention to, because if you don't, then you're going to be closing yourself off, because a lot of leaders, one, don't like to share knowledge, or some people, because they believe that knowledge is power, and if I have all the knowledge, then I'm more powerful than everybody else. And making mistakes is something that we can't allow, because then it means you don't know what you're doing. Get them out, they're not a good leader, kind of that. Those are very poor approaches to things in life. Making mistakes is how we learn. All right, you don't expect that you will do something for the first time and get it right. Making mistakes is part of a learning process. All right, and that actually speaks to the learning model now. So for example, for us to really learn something, we have to make sure that our focus, will, and capabilities intersect. All right, so as you can see, that's where you have the set of all three, but you have subsets of that: want to do, could do, can do. That's where there's there's not the intersection of all three of the focal points that we're looking at here: focus, will, and capacity or capability. All right. So that's that area of the all three coming together is important. For us to really learn, we need to be focused, we need to be willing, and we need to develop capacity. All right. So think about that when this is another learning model that that exists outside there. It's part of the scientific model. So if we think about it, you make some sort of critical inquiry, you make a decision, also like set up a theory, you conceptualize that theory, you try to apply it, you look at what the application of it does, the experience of that then brings you to a point where you gather your data of what happened, you make your reflections, and then you either go back to changing your critical inquiry and making adjustments and testing it again. Or once it holds to, making itself working constantly and repetitively, then it becomes part of existing theory, which is then applied in the real world. That's like the scientific model. For those of you who ever looked at the what makes science science, this is the thinking that takes us that way. Now, the most effective organizations and communities are those that value lifelong learning and that they're learning environments. So because it means that regardless of where anybody reaches in the organization, and this includes the leader, it doesn't matter where they are. There's always more to learn. And that's something in life. If you ever think about the amount of information that gets to us, the amount of learning that we can go through and how better we can become, we have to understand that we have to value lifelong learning, because it is only through learning new things and improving ourselves that we can continue to grow and develop. I mean, if you really think about it, even when we die, we learn. Because we then we learn what takes place on that other side. I mean, we don't know. Nobody's ever come back and tell us, hey, this is what's going to happen, kind of situation. So we still have to learn regardless. So lifelong learning is a feature or characteristic of very good organizations and, importantly, very good leaders across the board. All right, so another way in which we learn is through experience. When we experience things, it's probably the strongest or most effective way to learn something. Concrete experiences take what we think about and make it reality. And only when we make it reality, we can evaluate how good we've learned something, and then we can reflect upon it and then improve on our performance. So it's really going to be important, because that's what this model tells us. We think about things, reflective observation, and we conceptualize trying to do it. And then when we do it, the experience provides us with information that tells us whether we are performing it well or not. And based upon that, we reflect on it, we think about it again, and then we do it again. If you think about a practical exercise, like let's say learning to play an instrument, you think about it, you read about it, you research it and that kind of stuff. And the only way for you to actually get to that step is active experimentation, trying to play the instrument or perform an instrument. That experience then gives you a host of information to be able to think about, well, what did I do? What happened? How did it sound? Did I get this right? So on. And again, that takes you back to the abstract conceptualization. So experiential learning is probably the most powerful form of learning that any organization or leader can. And that's what we need to say here. The only way you all are going to really and truly learn about leadership is that you have to experience it, because that's the only way it's going to really start to hit home for you. So I'd like to close off on this one. Leadership is a role open to anyone. It is living by a personal set of rules in which you motivate others to do the right thing, be engaged in the world, and to listen to others and their concern. Leadership is focused on the other person. That's by Chandra Johnson from the text that I've chosen itself, from the Exploring Leadership text. I found that this quotation by her really puts the emphasis on the most important thing. It's anybody can participate in being a leader. And it's important that we encourage others to do it, but we encourage others to do it in the correct way. And we have to remember, in all the action we get involved with, it is not really about what we do, but it's on the relationship we develop with other people. So the other person becomes a critical thing. All right. So just to let you know, leadership is not the privilege of the few, but the opportunities for all of us. All right. So it's my citation for the information that you have here. So any questions that people want to ask at this point in time? Clarification that you want to get? Everybody's clear? Ooh, there's something in the chat. Petal is asking to be let in. When was that? That'd be a while back. All right. Any other questions that people wanted to ask? Concerns, queries, issues that came up? Yeah. Okay. So Ms. Bean, you still have any problem with your with the sticking kind of thing?
No, I changed from 5G to 2G, so it seems to be better.
All right, that means your 5G is giving problems.
Yeah, I think it's too far.
No, it might be just too much people on the network at this point in time. Given this time frame, this is kind of like a high usage period. All right, anybody has any questions? And they understood everything. They kind of grasped all the concepts that I was talking about. If you get a chance, you could go through the textbook itself and look at that first chapter. But I would tell you, move on to the next chapter, have a look at that, because that's a lot more information that we have to go through next week. All right. Any questions about anything else? Anybody has? If not, we can call it quits for today. Next week will probably be a bit later. Remember, we started at 5:30, so we should be going to about 8:30. But I think we're good to go tonight. No questions, anybody? All right, if there are no questions, I'll stop the recording now.